obviously you do the same centering technique. You just kind of squeeze in, cone upward, and I'm just using kind of this part of my hand to do a lot of the downward work, kind of get it toward the wheel head, and then the outsides of my hands, actually down here on the bottoms of my hands, they're kind of keeping the clay inward, keeping the clay from really flying outward and going off. So cone it one more time. And when I cone it, I'm just kind of, I'm putting pressure down here. I'm supporting it with the whole hand, but I'm putting pressure down here with my hand, and I'm just kind of moving the clay upward just to kind of get a cone. That's basically wedging on the wheel head so that you can kind of get the extra air bubbles out, and it also aligns the clay so that when you get it down ready to go, the clay is nice and centered and the particles are all going the right way. So push down one more time. Okay, so for a bowl, what I like to do, I like to have a little bit thicker bit of clay, a little bit thicker finished wedge centered piece, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to push down about a ½ inch away from the base. Okay, and the reason I do that is because I'm going to flip the pot over when it's all said and done and trim. Okay, so I'm going to kind of create a bowl shape right away. So instead of opening it like I did a cylinder, I'm going to open it so that I have a shallow plate or a shallow bowl or a deep plate, however you want to look at it. Okay, so you see I already have a bowl shape. So in theory, if I wanted to stop, I could. Obviously you wouldn't want to, but if I wanted to, I could say I have a bowl, finished. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of just hold my hand on the inside to support the wall, and I'm just going to kind of move the clay upward just a little bit. I just kind of use my fingertips, and really all I did was I just kind of squeezed a little bit, just to kind of get the wall up high enough so that I could actually make a pull. Because otherwise, the clay is just down a little too low for my fingers to really make an effective pull. Okay. When I make bowls, I don't use a knuckle pull. I use my fingertips because it's easier to get down to the bottom of the pot and control what's going on. And you're not being as aggressive with it as you are a cylinder. So what I do is I want to kind of keep the bowl shape on the inside. So when I make the bowl, I kind of push in with my outside hand, and I run my hand up the inside of the pot to make sure that I'm maintaining a bowl shape, and then I start kind of pinching outward. And you don't want to move. Some people like to make a straight cylinder and then bowl it out. I kind of like to open it up and then make the shape a little more pronounced. Okay, but I'm going to push in slightly, and then just really, when I make bowls, it's more of a pinching thing. With cylinders, your knuckle and your fingers on the inside were kind of apart from each other. This way, they're kind of apart, but it's a little more like a pinch, just kind of squeezing the clay outward. And I like to scrape the extra clay off the bottom as much as I can, so that I have less to trim tomorrow or whenever I'm going to trim it. So I push in a little bit. Push the clay out. I just go until I get about the thickness I want. And as you can see, I still got a bowl shape going on. I'm going to have to go inside the pot and really get it to where I want it, but I've got it sort of going on still. Keep a nice smooth rim. Okay, now the next step is, I've got it about the thickness I want. I can always trim it thinner. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take my rib on the inside, and I'm just going to kind of make the shape the way I want it to. So like, really smooth it out, have a nice gradual curve upward so that it really has a bowl shape. Because obviously you don't want big funny ripples, or you don't want it to have what's called a beginner's hump, where you have basically like a flat cylinder or a flat base, a little bit of hump of clay where you couldn't quite squeeze it all out, and then a wall. You want to try and have as gradual of a curve as you can, so that it's, one, aesthetically pleasing, and two, it's functional. Because if you're running a fork in there or a spoon, and you have a big hump or something, and you go, da-da, you're not going to like the bowl as much as you would if it was just a nice smooth surface. So make sure that you always smooth your rim out. Now that I got my shape, I mean, there's a bowl right there. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to find a wooden knife right here. Okay, so I got my wooden knife. What I'm going to do is I'm going to wet trim the clay. So down at the bottom, the clay is bowl shaped, and then it kind of comes out a little bit. So I'm going to take my wooden knife, I'm just going to kind of stick it into the side of the clay, so I get rid of all that extra clay that I don't want to have to trim later. So it's easier to get rid of it now while the clay's really wet. I got rid of that much clay, so now I don't have to trim that later. It's easier to do it now while the clay's wet as opposed to later when the clay's a little more stiff. So I take my tool, and when I did that, stuck my knife, the wooden knife in there, I kind of made that beginner's hump I was talking about, where it's kind of one bowl going on, a hump, and then the rest of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take the rib, smooth it all back out, and make sure you bevel the bottom of this pot, just the way you would with anything. You take your tool, your rib, bevel the bottom so that it's easy to take out. And now what you're going to do is you're going to do the same thing with the piece of string, or the piece of wire tool, or whatever you're using. Run the wire tool from back to front. Some people go front to back. It's really just a matter of preference, but if you go from back to front, you rock away, front to back, you rock towards. Okay, so make sure your hands are dry. The outside of the pot should be dry, just from me not using much water, but make sure your hands are dry. Okay, so since I'm going to trim this bowl, and I left a thick enough foot, I'm going to take it off a little differently. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to kind of put my hands on the outside because it's a wider shape. It's a little more fragile. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my fingers like this, and I'm going to trim the bowl later. So whatever impressions I'm going to put into the pot should be trimmed away. So I'm going to kind of take my finger like this. So I have 4 points of pressure. 1, 2, 3, 4. Kind of spread them apart. Get them all the way to the bottom and rock away. And as you can see how I'm holding it right there. And I'll just move the pot somewhere. I'll just set it here for right now. But I end up having little tiny impressions on the pot where my fingers were. But those will be trimmed away and it'll fix the shape. And you can do a lot of fun things with bowls. Like let's say I want to make it a square shape, then I just kind of run my fingers up the side. And you have a square bowl. I mean, you can do a lot of fun things with it. Just make sure that you have a nice curve at the bottom. That's the main thing I've learned. And I've actually heard of some potters who say, if you don't have a perfect curve, take a trimming tool to it. I would recommend try and do it as quickly or as much as you can while the clay's already wet, so you don't have to fix it later. But it's important to keep a smooth bottom of the pot, nice smooth curve. Otherwise, you're not going to like the pot as much. And if you're trying to sell it, people won't like them as much either. So, that's a bowl.